He abandoned me during pregnancy. Fate made him our driver. Nia Carter was 7 months pregnant when Malcolm Reyes packed a single suitcase and walked out of their apartment for the last time. She remembered every small detail of that afternoon, with a clarity that never faded, even years later. The way the late afternoon light came through the kitchen window, the sound of his suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor, the way he wouldn't quite look at her while he explained, in a voice that tried to sound reasonable, that he wasn't ready for this, that he needed space to figure things out, that he was sure she would understand eventually. "I'm 7 months pregnant, Malcolm," Nia said, standing in the doorway, one hand resting instinctively on her belly. "There isn't an eventually where this makes sense to me." "I'll send money when I can," he said, avoiding her eyes. I can't do this right now. I'm sorry." He left that evening, and Nia never saw a single dollar of the money he'd promised. She never saw him again, in fact, for almost 8 years. Not once, not even a phone call, not even when their daughter was born 2 months later, alone, with only Nia's sister Denise in the delivery room beside her. The years that followed were the hardest of Nia's life, though she rarely allowed herself to dwell on that fact for long. There simply wasn't time to dwell, not with a newborn daughter depending entirely on her. She moved back in with her mother for the first year, working 2 jobs, daytime shifts at a dental office as a receptionist, evening shifts at a call center, while her mother watched baby Aaliyah during the hours Nia couldn't be home. It was grueling, exhausting work, made bearable only by the fierce, uncomplicated love she felt every time she looked at her daughter's face. Aaliyah had Malcolm's eyes, a detail that occasionally caught Nia off guard in quiet moments, though she never once let that detail translate into anything but love for the little girl who had done nothing wrong at all. By the time Aaliyah turned 2, Nia had saved enough to move into a small apartment of her own. By the time she turned 4, Nia had finished an online associate's degree in business administration, taking classes late at night after Aaliyah was asleep, determined to build something more stable than the receptionist job that, while steady, offered little room for real growth. "You work too hard, Nia," her mother told her more than once, watching her daughter fall asleep some nights with a textbook still open on her lap. "You need to rest sometimes." "I'll rest once we're actually secure," Nia would say. "I'm not raising my daughter the way I was raised, worrying every month about rent. I want better for her than that." At 26, with her associate's degree finished and several years of steady work experience behind her, Nia took the biggest risk of her life. She used a small business loan, along with savings she had carefully built over years of careful budgeting, to open a modest catering company, specializing in affordable, elegant event food for weddings and corporate gatherings. The early years of Reyes Catering, she had kept Malcolm's last name only because it was also Aaliyah's last name, and changing it felt, at the time, like more effort than it was worth, were difficult, filled with long hours, tight margins, and the constant fear that comes with building something entirely from scratch, with a small daughter depending on its success. But Nia had a gift for the work that quickly became apparent to anyone who hired her. She understood, instinctively, how to make an event feel special, without excessive cost. She built relationships with local vendors that let her offer better prices than larger, more established competitors. She showed up, personally, to every single event in the early years, making sure every detail was exactly right, building a reputation, slowly, for reliability and genuine care. By the time Aaliyah started elementary school, Reyes Catering had grown from a one-woman operation running out of a small rented kitchen into a real company with 6 full-time employees and a client list that included several of the city's most respected event venues. Aaliyah grew up bright, curious, and remarkably grounded for a child who had, in some sense, grown up alongside her mother's business, attending early morning kitchen prep sessions in her pajamas before school, falling asleep some evenings in the back office while her mother finished paperwork after a late event. She asked about her father occasionally, as children do, with the blunt, uncomplicated curiosity that comes before a child fully understands the weight certain questions can carry. "Why don't I have a dad like everyone else at school?" she asked once, around age 6, sitting at the kitchen table while Nia prepared dinner. Nia had thought carefully, over the years, about how she wanted to answer this question, when it inevitably came, determined to be honest without burdening her young daughter with more anger or bitterness than a child needed to carry. "You do have a dad," Nia said gently, sitting down across from her. "He's just not someone who's been part of our daily lives. Sometimes grown-ups aren't ready to be the parent a child needs, even when they should be. That's not something you did wrong, sweetheart. That's something he wasn't ready for, and it's not your job to carry that as if it were your fault." Aaliyah considered this with the serious concentration young children sometimes bring to complicated ideas. "Do you think he'll ever be ready?" she asked. "I don't know," Nia said honestly, "but whether he is or isn't, you have me, and Grandma, and Aunt Denise, and a whole family who loves you completely. That's already a full, happy life, even without him in it." By the time Aaliyah turned 8, Reyes Catering had grown into one of the most respected catering companies in the city, with Nia now overseeing a staff of nearly 30 employees and a client roster that included several major corporations and, increasingly, high-profile private events for the city's wealthier families. Success, Nia had learned over the years, brought its own particular set of demands: long days, constant travel between event sites, and, eventually, the need for reliable, professional transportation to help her manage an increasingly complicated schedule of client meetings, vendor visits, and event walkthroughs across the city. She hired a driver through a reputable local service, a decision made purely for practical reasons, freeing up her own time and energy to focus on the business itself, rather than losing hours each week navigating traffic and parking across the city. The driving service sent over a new employee. For her first scheduled ride on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, a man in his mid-30s, professional and polite, who introduced himself with a handshake and a name that made Nia's entire body go still for a long, silent moment. "Malcolm Reyes," he said, extending his hand with the easy, practiced courtesy of someone used to greeting new clients. "I'll be your driver today. Nice to meet you." He did not recognize her. 8 years, a different last name written differently on her business cards, a different life built entirely without him. He looked at her with the polite, empty expression of a stranger meeting a new client for the very first time. Nia sat in the back seat of the car that morning in a state of controlled shock, her mind racing through 1,000 different reactions at once, none of which felt like the right one to actually show. Malcolm chatted easily during the drive, the way professional drivers often do, asking polite questions about her schedule, commenting on the traffic, entirely unaware that the woman he was driving to her downtown office had once stood in a kitchen doorway 7 months pregnant, watching him roll a suitcase toward the door and out of her life. He looked older than Nia remembered, a little heavier, some gray beginning to show at his temples, his once confident posture now carrying a subtle, tired weariness that suggested the years since he'd left had not been kind to him either. "Rough morning?" Nia asked carefully, testing the waters, curious despite herself about what his life had become. "Just tired," Malcolm said, with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Long week. This job keeps me busy, which is good, honestly. Better than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" Nia asked. "Not working at all," Malcolm said. "Things have been tight the past few years. Had some bad luck with jobs. A business that didn't work out. This driving gig's been steady at least. Keeps the lights on." Nia said nothing further for the rest of the ride, watching the city pass by outside the window, turning over, again and again, the strange, almost unbelievable coincidence that had placed this particular man, of all the drivers in the city, behind the wheel of her car. That evening, Nia told her sister Denise everything, sitting together at Nia's kitchen table long after Aaliyah had gone to bed. "You're joking," Denise said, staring at her sister in disbelief. "Malcolm, your driver. After 8 years, he just shows up, driving you around the city and doesn't even recognize you?" "He doesn't recognize me at all," Nia confirmed. "Different last name on my card. 8 years older. I don't think he ever expected to see me again, honestly, so it probably never occurred to him to look closely." "What are you going to do?" Denise asked. Nia was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly in her hands. "I don't know yet," she admitted. Part of me wants to fire the driving service immediately and never think about him again. Part of me, I don't know, Denise, part of me wants to understand what happened to him. Not because I owe him anything, just because some part of me has always wondered, quietly, what kind of life he built for himself after he left. Be careful, Denise said gently. You've built something really good, Nia. Don't let him anywhere near it if it risks that. I won't, Nia said, but I think, before I decide anything, I want to know more. He doesn't know who I am yet. That gives me time to figure out what I actually want to do with that information. Over the following weeks, without revealing her identity, Nia requested Malcolm as her regular driver, using the small talk of routine car rides to carefully, patiently learn the shape of the life he had built since walking out of hers. What she learned painted a picture far different from the confident, dismissive man who had left her pregnant and alone 8 years earlier. Malcolm had drifted through a series of jobs and failed ventures in the years since. A landscaping business that folded within 2 years, a brief attempt at real estate sales that never gained traction, a series of retail and delivery jobs that paid the bills but never amounted to anything stable. He had married briefly, in the years after leaving Nia, to a woman named Vanessa, a marriage that had ended in divorce after just under 3 years, following what Malcolm described, vaguely and with clear discomfort, as some of the same old patterns resurfacing. He had no other children. When Nia, carefully, casually, asked him one afternoon whether he had kids of his own, his face went through a complicated series of expressions before he answered. I don't, actually, he said quietly. Almost did, once. A long time ago, things didn't work out the way they should have. I think about it sometimes, actually. Wonder what might have been different. Nia, sitting in the back seat, said nothing, though her hands gripped the edge of her seat tightly enough that her knuckles turned pale. The weeks that followed were emotionally exhausting for Nia in ways she hadn't fully anticipated when she first decided to learn more about the man who had, unknowingly, become her regular driver. She found herself replaying old memories she had worked hard, over the years, to set aside, the early, happy years of her relationship with Malcolm, before everything fell apart, memories she had almost entirely stopped visiting once she'd built a new life focused entirely on Aaliyah and her business. She also found herself watching Malcolm with a strange, complicated mixture of feelings she struggled to name clearly, not quite anger, though anger was certainly present somewhere underneath everything else, not quite pity, though there was an undeniable sadness in watching a man who had once seemed so confidently sure of his own choices, now drifting, quietly defeated, through a life that had clearly not turned out the way he expected. You seem distracted lately, her business partner Grace observed one afternoon, noticing Nia staring blankly at a spreadsheet she'd been supposedly reviewing for the past 20 minutes. Everything okay? Nia hesitated, then decided, finally, to tell Grace the truth, one of the only people at work she trusted enough to share something this personal. My driver, Nia said quietly. It's Aaliyah's father. He doesn't know who I am. Grace's eyebrows shot up in genuine shock. Nia, what are you going to do? I still don't know, Nia admitted. I think I need to decide soon, though. This can't go on indefinitely. The situation grew even more complicated when Aaliyah, now 8 and increasingly perceptive, began noticing changes in her mother's mood and eventually asked a question Nia had been quietly dreading. Who's the new driver you keep talking about? Aaliyah asked one evening, looking up from her homework at the kitchen table. You mentioned him again on the phone with Aunt Denise. Is he nice? Nia sat down slowly across from her daughter, deciding, after a long internal debate, that the time had finally come for at least a partial truth. Sweetheart, she said carefully, I need to tell you something important. The driver I've been talking about, his name is Malcolm. He's your father. Aaliyah's eyes went wide, her homework instantly forgotten. My dad, the one who left before I was born? That's him, Nia confirmed gently. It's a strange coincidence, honestly. He got hired by the driving service I use for work, and he doesn't recognize me. Different name on my business card, and it's been a long time since he last saw me. Does he know about me? Aaliyah asked, her voice small and uncertain. Not yet, Nia said. "I haven't decided yet what I want to do about any of this. I wanted you to know the truth, though, since it's your life too, and you deserve to understand what's happening, even while I figure out the right next steps." Aaliyah was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same serious concentration she'd shown as a much younger child asking about her missing father. "I think," she said finally, "I'd like to meet him someday. Not right now, maybe. But someday, I want to know what he's actually like, not just the story of what he did." "That's a very mature thing to want," Nia said, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "We'll figure out the right way to do that together, when the time is right." After weeks of careful thought, Nia finally decided on her next step. She would reveal her identity to Malcolm directly, in a controlled, private setting, rather than allowing the strange charade of anonymous car rides to continue indefinitely. She arranged for one final ride, not to her office this time, but to a quiet cafe across town, telling the driving service dispatcher she needed Malcolm specifically for a personal errand that would take slightly longer than their usual routes. Malcolm arrived exactly on time, as he always did, greeting her with the same polite, professional courtesy he'd shown every single time before. "Where to today?" he asked, as she settled into the back seat. "Actually," Nia said carefully, "I'd like you to park somewhere quiet for a few minutes first. There's something I need to tell you, and I think it's better said face to face, rather than through the rearview mirror." Malcolm glanced back at her, slightly confused but professionally accommodating, and pulled into a nearby parking lot, turning off the engine and turning around in his seat to face her directly. "Is everything all right?" he asked. Nia took a slow, steadying breath. "Malcolm," she said quietly, "it's Nia. Nia Carter. You knew me a long time ago, under a different situation than the one you're seeing now." For a long moment, Malcolm simply stared at her, his professional composure completely dissolving as recognition slowly, painfully dawned across his face. "Nia," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh my God, Nia." "It's been 8 years," Nia said evenly, watching him carefully, cataloging every flicker of emotion crossing his face. Shock, then something like shame, then, unmistakably, fear. I had no idea," Malcolm stammered. Your name, on the account, it said." "Reyes," Nia said. "I kept it, not for you, for our daughter." The word landed in the car like a physical weight. Malcolm's face went pale. "Our daughter," he repeated slowly. "She was born? Of course she was born. You never found out," Nia finished for him, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion she'd been holding back for weeks. "You left before she was born and never once reached out to ask. Her name is Aaliyah. She's 8 years old. She's bright and funny and remarkably kind, considering the fact that her father walked out on both of us 7 months into a pregnancy and never looked back." Malcolm sat in silence for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, even though the car remained parked, motionless. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "I've thought about it, about you, about what happened, more times than you probably think I have. I never knew how to fix what I did. I told myself eventually that it was probably better for both of you if I just stayed away completely, rather than showing up and making things more complicated." "That's a very convenient story to tell yourself," Nia said, her voice sharpening slightly for the first time. "It let you avoid the responsibility without ever having to face what it actually cost us." Over the following weeks, Malcolm found himself confronting, for the first time in 8 years, the full weight of the choice he had made, not through anger or punishment from Nia, but simply through the plain, undeniable evidence of everything he had missed. Nia, after careful consideration and several long conversations with Denise and her own therapist, decided that Aaliyah deserved the opportunity to know her father if Malcolm proved himself genuinely willing to show up consistently, rather than simply reappearing dramatically and then disappearing again the moment real effort was required. She arranged for Malcolm to attend a series of supervised visits, initially brief and carefully structured, giving both Aaliyah and Malcolm the chance to build a relationship slowly, without the pressure of expectations neither of them could realistically meet overnight. The first meeting, held at a public park on a quiet Saturday afternoon, was awkward and emotionally fraught for everyone involved. Aaliyah, curious but understandably guarded, studied her father carefully from a cautious distance before finally approaching him near the swings. "You're my dad," she said, more a statement than a question, studying his face with the same serious, observant expression Nia recognized from years of watching her daughter navigate difficult moments. "I am," Malcolm said, crouching down slightly to meet her eye level, his voice unsteady. "I'm really sorry it's taken this long for us to meet properly. That's not something you did wrong. That was entirely my mistake, and I understand if it takes time for you to trust that I mean it when I say I want to do better." Aaliyah considered this seriously. Then, with the simple directness only children seem to manage, asked the question that had clearly been on her mind since Nia first told her the truth. "Why did you leave before I was born?" Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, visibly struggling to find an honest answer that didn't simply excuse what he'd done. "I was scared," he said finally. "Being a father felt like more responsibility than I believed I could handle, and instead of facing that fear like an adult, I ran from it. That wasn't fair to you, or to your mom. I've regretted it for a long time, even before I understood, today, exactly who I'd been driving around the city for the past several weeks." Over the following months, Malcolm made a genuine, sustained effort to build a real relationship with Aaliyah, showing up consistently for scheduled visits, remembering small details about her interests, gradually earning small increments of trust that Nia watched carefully, cautiously allowing herself to hope, without fully letting her guard down. He also, during this period, made real efforts to stabilize his own life, taking on additional shifts to save money, eventually enrolling in a certification program for commercial driving that would offer more stable, better-paying work than his current position. Motivated, he told Nia during one careful conversation, by a genuine desire to be able to provide something real for Aaliyah, rather than simply showing up empty-handed. "I know money was never really the issue back then," he admitted to Nia one afternoon, during a brief conversation while dropping off Aaliyah after a visit. "I could have found a way to help, financially, even while I was avoiding everything else. I just didn't. I think, honestly, avoiding the financial responsibility felt like one more way of avoiding the reality of what I'd walked away from. I regret that more than almost anything else, looking back." "You have a long way to go before any of this fully makes up for 8 years, Nia said honestly. "But I'll acknowledge, Malcolm, the effort you're showing now is more than I expected, given everything. I hope it continues to be real, and not just a temporary reaction to the shock of running into us again." "I understand your caution," Malcolm said. "I think, if I'm honest, I'd be cautious too, in your position. I just hope, over time, I can show you it's not temporary." Not everyone in Nia's life was as willing to extend even cautious patience toward Malcolm's efforts. "I don't understand why you're letting him back into her life at all," Denise said bluntly, during one particularly tense conversation at Nia's kitchen table. "He abandoned you, pregnant, alone, and now the second he stumbles back into your life by pure accident, you're just supposed to give him a chance to play father, after everything?" "I'm not doing this for him," Nia said carefully. "I'm doing it because Aaliyah asked to know him, and because I believe, as her mother, that she deserves the chance to form her own understanding of who he is. Not just the story of what he did before she was born, but an honest picture of who he's choosing to be now, for better or worse." "And if he disappoints her again?" Denise pressed. "What then?" "Then I'll be there to help her through that, the way I've been there for everything else," Nia said firmly. "I'm not naive about this, Denise. I'm watching him carefully. If his effort is real, Aaliyah gets the chance to have a father who's actually present. If it isn't, she'll learn that too, but she'll learn it with me right beside her, not blindsided by it the way I was." Denise studied her sister for a long moment, then finally nodded, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "You've always been stronger than me about things like this," she said. I just don't want to see you or Aaliyah hurt again. I don't want that either, Nia said. But I've also learned over the years that protecting Aaliyah from every possible disappointment isn't actually the same as protecting her well-being. Sometimes the healthiest thing is giving people a real, fair chance to prove who they are, with clear boundaries in place if they fail to meet it. A full year after that first strange car ride, where Malcolm failed to recognize the woman he'd once left pregnant and alone, the relationship between Malcolm and his daughter had grown into something genuinely stable. Not perfect, not without occasional awkwardness or difficult conversations, but real and consistent, in a way that had earned, slowly, Nia's cautious trust. Malcolm had completed his commercial driving certification and secured a significantly better-paying position with a regional delivery company, finally providing consistent financial support for Aaliyah without being asked, a detail Nia noted, quietly, as one of the clearest signs that his change was genuine rather than performative. He no longer worked as Nia's driver, a transition both of them had agreed made sense, given the complicated history now openly acknowledged between them, but he remained a steady, reliable presence in Aaliyah's life, attending her school events, taking her to lunch every other weekend, slowly building the kind of relationship that, while it could never fully make up for 8 missing years, at least gave Aaliyah something real to build on going forward. I used to think, Aaliyah told her mother one evening, now 9 years old, and increasingly thoughtful about her own complicated family history, that not having a dad around meant something was wrong with me. Now I think it just meant he wasn't ready yet, the way you told me a long time ago. I'm glad he got ready eventually, even if it took a really long time. I'm glad too, sweetheart, Nia said, pulling her daughter into a hug. Not for his sake, for yours. While Malcolm slowly rebuilt his relationship with Aaliyah, Nia's business continued its steady, impressive growth, expanding that year into a second location across town and securing a contract to cater several of the city's largest annual corporate events, a milestone that years earlier, during those exhausting early days of working 2 jobs while raising a newborn alone, Nia could scarcely have imagined achieving. She was profiled that year in a regional business magazine, an article that focused primarily on her entrepreneurial success, but touched briefly, at Nia's own careful discretion, on the personal journey that had shaped her determination. A young single mother, abandoned during pregnancy, who had built something remarkable entirely on her own terms, refusing to let circumstance define the limits of what she was capable of achieving. The article did not mention Malcolm by name, out of respect for the fragile, still developing relationship he was building with Aaliyah, but Nia included one line, near the end of the interview, that captured something true about the strange, unexpected turn her story had taken. I've learned, she told the interviewer, that life has a strange sense of timing sometimes. The people who hurt you most deeply don't always stay gone forever. Sometimes they come back in the strangest possible ways, and you're left with a choice about what to do with that. I chose, in the end, to let my daughter make her own judgment about her father, rather than letting my own old pain decide that for her. I think that's been one of the better decisions I've made, in a life full of difficult ones. 2 years after that first strange, fateful car ride, Aaliyah, now 10, starred in her elementary school's spring play, playing the lead role she had worked hard for months to earn. Nia sat in the audience that evening beside her mother and Denise, watching with fierce, overwhelming pride as her daughter delivered her lines with confidence and poise far beyond her years. Near the end of the performance, scanning the crowded auditorium during a brief break, Nia spotted Malcolm sitting several rows back, alone, watching his daughter's performance with an expression of quiet, genuine pride that mirrored her own. After the play ended, amid the crowded, celebratory chaos of parents congratulating their children, Malcolm approached Nia carefully, holding a small bouquet of flowers he'd clearly brought for Aaliyah. She was incredible, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't think I've ever been prouder of anything in my life, watching her up there. She worked really hard for that role, Nia said, allowing herself, for the first time in a long while, a genuine, easy smile in his direction. She gets that determination from somewhere, I suppose. I like to think she gets the good parts from you, Malcolm said quietly. I know I don't get to claim much credit for who she's become. I'm grateful, every single day now, that you let me try to be part of it anyway, even after everything." Nia studied him for a long moment, considering the strange, winding path that had brought them to this particular evening, the pain of abandonment, the years of hard, solitary rebuilding, the improbable coincidence of a car ride that had, against every reasonable expectation, ultimately led to something resembling healing, rather than simply reopening an old wound. "Fate has a strange sense of humor sometimes," she said finally. "I never in a million years expected the man who left me pregnant and alone to end up, of all things, driving me around the city 8 years later. But I think, looking back, I'm glad it happened the way it did. It gave Aaliyah the chance to know you on her own terms, at her own pace, with both of us watching carefully to make sure it was real." "I'm grateful for that chance," Malcolm said. "More grateful than I probably know how to properly express. I don't take it for granted, Nia. Not for a single day." In the years that followed, when people occasionally asked Nia about the improbable story of how her daughter's father had ended up, quite literally, in the driver's seat of her own success, chauffeuring her to business meetings for weeks without either of them realizing who the other truly was, she told the story carefully, without bitterness, focusing less on the shock of the coincidence and more on what she had chosen to do with it once it was revealed. "I could have fired him the moment I found out," she would say. "Part of me wanted to, honestly, in that very first moment of recognition. But I've learned, over the years, that the healthiest kind of strength isn't always about punishing the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about staying clear-eyed enough to make the decision that actually serves your child best, even when your own old pain is screaming at you to do something else entirely." "Do you regret giving him the chance?" people would sometimes ask. "Not for a moment," Nia would answer honestly. "Not because it erased what happened. It didn't, and it never will completely. But because my daughter got the chance to build her own relationship with her father, on her own terms, with clear eyes about who he really was, rather than growing up with only the second-hand story of who he'd once been. I think that's a better gift than revenge ever could have been." 5 years after that first strange car ride, Aaliyah, now 13, sat with her mother one evening, working on a school project about family history that required interviewing a parent about a meaningful life event. "Tell me about the driver thing again," Aaliyah said, notebook open on her lap, genuinely curious, despite having heard fragments of the story many times over the years. "I want to write it down properly this time, in my own words." Nia smiled, settling into her chair, ready to tell the story once more. Not as a tale of betrayal and abandonment, though that painful chapter remained an honest, unavoidable part of it, but as a story about resilience, unexpected coincidence, and the quiet, hard-won courage it takes to build something real out of circumstances that once seemed entirely broken beyond repair. "Your father left before you were born," Nia began, the way she always began this particular story. "It was the hardest thing I'd ever faced, at the time, but I built a good life for us anyway, brick by brick, without waiting for him to come back. And then, years later, in the strangest twist of fate I've ever experienced, he ended up working as my driver, without either of us realizing who the other one truly was, until the day I finally told him the truth." "And you gave him a second chance," Aaliyah said, writing quickly in her notebook. "Even though he didn't deserve one, at first. I gave you the chance to decide what you wanted, from him, on your own terms," Nia corrected gently. "That's a little different than simply giving him a second chance, sweetheart. I think that distinction matters. I never did this for him. I did it because I believed, and still believe, that you deserved the opportunity to know your own father honestly, rather than only through the pain of what he once did." Aaliyah looked up from her notebook, studying her mother with the same thoughtful, observant expression she'd carried since she was old enough to ask difficult questions. "I think," she said finally, "that's the real reason the story turned out okay, in the end. Not because Dad came back, because you never let what he did decide who you were going to become." Nia reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling in that quiet moment the full weight and beauty of everything she had built, not despite the pain of that long-ago afternoon in the kitchen doorway, but alongside it, carried forward into something genuinely hard-earned good. "That's exactly right," she said softly. "That's exactly right, sweetheart." 3 years after that school project about family history, Aaliyah Reyes was 16 years old, sharp-witted, ambitious, and increasingly interested in the business her mother had built from nothing. She spent her summers now working part-time at Reyes Catering, starting, at her own insistence, in the same entry-level kitchen prep role Nia had once done herself in the company's very first year. She wanted, she told her mother, to understand the business from the ground up, the same way Nia had, rather than simply inheriting a comfortable position without earning it first. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Nia told her, watching her daughter carefully chop vegetables alongside the regular kitchen staff on a busy Saturday morning. "You're already proving plenty, just by wanting to understand the work instead of assuming it's owed to you." "I want to prove it to myself," Aaliyah said, not looking up from her cutting board. "I want to know I actually earned whatever I end up doing with my life, not just handed something because of whose daughter I am." Nia smiled, recognizing, with quiet pride, the same fierce independence that had carried her through the hardest years of her own life, now blooming naturally in her daughter, without the painful circumstances that had originally forced Nia to develop it. Malcolm, now solidly established in his commercial driving career, had become, over the years, a genuinely steady presence in Aaliyah's life, not a replacement for the early years he'd missed, which both of them had long since accepted could never fully be recovered, but a real, ongoing relationship built carefully on consistency rather than grand gestures. He picked her up most Sunday afternoons for lunch, a tradition that had held steady for nearly 5 years now, through Aaliyah's early teenage moodiness, through the awkward stretch when she'd briefly, at 14, pulled away from almost everyone in her life, while sorting through typical adolescent turbulence, through her gradual return to warmth and openness as she grew more secure in herself. "I used to worry," Malcolm admitted to Nia once, during one of their now routine, business-like conversations about scheduling and logistics, that she'd eventually get old enough to really understand what I did, back before she was born, and decide she didn't want anything to do with me at all. "I think honestly, some part of me still waits for that moment sometimes." "She understands more than you probably realize," Nia said honestly. "She's not a little girl anymore, Malcolm. She knows exactly what happened, and she's chosen, on her own terms, to build a relationship with you anyway. I think that says more about her character than it does about anything you've done to deserve it, though I'll admit, the consistency you've shown over the years has mattered too." "I know I'll never fully make up for those first 8 years," Malcolm said quietly. "I've stopped trying to fully make up for it, honestly. I just try to show up completely for the years I do get to be part of." The relative calm of this arrangement was tested when Malcolm's ex-wife, Vanessa, unexpectedly resurfaced in his life, reaching out after nearly a decade of no contact, hoping to reconcile. Vanessa had, in the years since her divorce from Malcolm, gone through her own difficult period of self-reflection, eventually reaching out with what appeared to be a genuine desire to rebuild the relationship, citing her own therapy and personal growth as reasons she believed things might be different this time. Malcolm, cautious but curious, agreed to meet with her, and the two slowly began seeing each other again, careful and tentative at first, testing whether the changes they both claimed to have made were genuinely real. This development complicated Aaliyah's relationship with her father in ways none of them had fully anticipated. Vanessa, it turned out, harbored some quiet resentment toward the existence of a daughter from Malcolm's previous relationship. Not overtly hostile, but distant, and occasionally, subtly dismissive in ways Aaliyah noticed immediately, having grown up highly attuned to exactly this kind of quiet exclusion. "She's nice enough when Dad's in the room," Aaliyah told Nia one evening, clearly troubled. "But when he steps away, even for a minute, she gets kind of cold, like she's just waiting for me to leave, so she can have him back to herself." Nia felt the old, protective instinct rise sharply in her chest, though she was careful, as always, to keep her voice measured and calm for her daughter's sake. "Have you told your father how that makes you feel?" Nia asked. "Not yet," Aaliyah admitted. "I don't want to cause problems for him, when he seems happier than I've seen him in a long time, but I also don't love feeling like an inconvenience every time I visit." You should tell him, Nia said gently, not to cause problems, because you deserve to feel welcome in your own father's life, regardless of who else is part of it. If he's really grown the way he says he has, he'll want to know, and he'll want to fix it. Aaliyah, gathering her courage over the following week, finally spoke honestly with her father about the discomfort she'd been feeling around Vanessa. Malcolm listened carefully, his face growing increasingly troubled as his daughter described the subtle coldness she'd noticed, the small moments of exclusion that, individually, might have seemed insignificant, but that, added together, painted a clear and troubling pattern. "I'm so sorry," Malcolm said, once she'd finished. "I should have noticed this myself, instead of needing you to point it out. You should never feel like an inconvenience around me, Aaliyah. Not ever, for any reason." He raised the issue directly with Vanessa that same week, a conversation that, according to what he later shared carefully with Nia, did not go entirely smoothly at first. Vanessa, defensive initially, eventually acknowledged some of her own unresolved insecurity about not having become a mother herself, insecurity that had, without her fully realizing it, translated into quiet resentment toward Aaliyah's presence in Malcolm's life. "I told her clearly," Malcolm said, "that Aaliyah isn't optional in my life. She's not something to be tolerated around the edges of a relationship. If we're going to build something together, she has to be genuinely, warmly included, not just politely endured. I made that non-negotiable." Vanessa, to her credit, made real efforts to change after that conversation, gradually building a warmer, more genuine relationship with Aaliyah over the following months. Not perfect, and not without occasional awkwardness, but honest in a way that Aaliyah, watching carefully, eventually came to trust. Meanwhile, Aaliyah's summer work at Reyes Catering deepened into something more substantial as she entered her senior year of high school, taking on increasing responsibility in the company's event coordination department, learning directly from Nia and Grace how to manage client relationships, vendor negotiations, and the countless small logistical details that made each event successful. "You have a real instinct for this," Grace told her one afternoon, watching Aaliyah smoothly handle a difficult client who had called with last-minute changes to a wedding order, calming the client's anxiety with the same natural warmth and competence Nia had shown in the company's earliest years. "You remind me a lot of your mother when she was starting out." "I hope so," Aaliyah said. "I want to build something of my own eventually. Maybe not exactly this business, but something that matters, the way this matters to her." Nia, overhearing this conversation from her office doorway, felt a familiar swell of pride, along with a quieter, more complicated feeling she hadn't quite expected. The growing awareness that her daughter, now nearly grown, would soon step fully into her own independent life, carrying forward not just the values Nia had worked so hard to instill, but a genuine, hard-earned confidence that hadn't come easily to Nia herself at that same age. As senior year progressed, Aaliyah began seriously considering her options for college, eventually deciding on a business program at a respected university 2 states away, far enough to build genuine independence, close enough to remain reachable for holidays and important family events. The decision, while exciting, brought with it a wave of complicated emotions for everyone involved. Nia, who had built her entire adult life around raising Aaliyah, found herself quietly grappling with the approaching reality of an empty house, even as she remained fiercely proud and supportive of her daughter's ambitions. Malcolm, for his part, worried in his own way about the physical distance the move would create, having only recently, over the past several years, built the kind of steady closeness with his daughter that he now feared might weaken once she moved so far away. "I know it's a good opportunity for her," he told Nia during one of their occasional coordinating conversations, this one about splitting the costs of Aaliyah's move-in weekend. "I just worry about losing the progress we've made, once she's not just a short drive away anymore." "She won't let that happen," Nia said, with more confidence than she entirely felt herself. "She's worked too hard to build a real relationship with you, to let distance undo it, but it'll take real effort from both of you. Regular calls, visits when you can manage them. Don't assume the relationship will just maintain itself without effort, just because it survived the hard years already." "I won't assume that," Malcolm said firmly. "I've learned that lesson already. the hard way. I don't intend to repeat it. Move-in day arrived on a warm September morning, with Nia, Malcolm, Denise, and even Vanessa all present to help Aaliyah settle into her new dormitory room, an arrangement that would have seemed impossible, even laughable, years earlier, when Nia first discovered Malcolm sitting behind the wheel of her car, utterly unaware of who she truly was. The day passed in a whirlwind of boxes, furniture assembly, and the particular chaos of hundreds of families simultaneously moving their children into the same dormitory building. By early evening, Aaliyah's room was finally arranged, and the small, unlikely gathering of family members stood together in the hallway, preparing for the difficult goodbye that had been quietly looming over the entire day. "I'm really proud of you," Nia said, pulling her daughter into a tight hug, fighting back tears she'd been holding at bay all day. "You've built something for yourself already, and you're only just getting started." "I learned that from you," Aaliyah said, her own voice thick with emotion. "All of it, the determination, the work ethic, the refusal to let hard circumstances decide who I'm going to become. That's all you, Mom." Malcolm stepped forward next, embracing his daughter with visible emotion of his own. "I'm proud of you too," he said quietly. "I know I don't always get to say that with the same weight your mother does, given everything, but I mean it completely. Call me anytime, about anything. I mean that." "I will, Dad," Aaliyah said. "I promise." The weeks following Aaliyah's departure for college were, for Nia, some of the strangest and most emotionally complicated of her adult life. After nearly 18 years of her entire daily rhythm being built around her daughter's needs, the sudden quiet of an empty house felt, at first, almost disorienting. She threw herself deeper into work during those first difficult weeks, expanding Reyes Catering into a third location and taking on an ambitious new contract with the city's largest annual charity gala, work that kept her productively busy while she slowly adjusted to this new, unfamiliar chapter of her life. Denise, noticing her sister's quiet struggle during this period, made a point of checking in more frequently, occasionally showing up unannounced with takeout and insisting Nia take an evening off from work entirely. "You built your whole adult identity around being her mother," Denise said gently, during one of these visits, watching Nia pick at her food distractedly. "It makes sense that it feels strange, figuring out who you are now that she's building her own life somewhere else. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just means you're human, and this is a real transition." "I know," Nia admitted. "I just didn't expect it to feel quite this disorienting. I've spent almost 18 years so completely focused on making sure she had everything she needed. I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to focus on now." "Maybe," Denise suggested carefully, "it's finally time to focus a little on yourself. You've earned that, Nia, more than almost anyone I know." It was during this period of quiet self-reflection that Nia found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, growing closer to a man named Terrence Hall, a respected local architect who had worked with Reyes Catering on several renovation projects for the company's expanding office space. Terrence was steady, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in Nia as a person, rather than simply as the successful business owner she had become. A quality Nia found, after so many years of guarded self-protection, both surprising and quietly welcome. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, over several months of shared dinners and long conversations, Nia allowing herself, gradually, to consider the possibility of real partnership again, after nearly 2 decades of focusing almost entirely on her daughter and her business, with little energy left over for her own personal life. "You don't have to rush this," Terrence told her gently, during one of their early conversations about the future, sensing her careful hesitation. "I can see you've built an incredible life, largely on your own. I'm not asking you to hand any of that over to make room for me. I just want the chance to build something alongside it, if you're open to that." "I think I am," Nia said, surprising herself slightly with how genuinely she meant it. "It's just been a long time since I let myself consider something like this seriously. I want to be honest with you about that, from the start." "I appreciate the honesty," Terrence said. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere." When Nia eventually told Aaliyah, during one of their regular video calls, that she had begun seeing someone seriously, Her daughter's reaction was warmer and more enthusiastic than Nia had quite expected. "Mom, that's wonderful," Aaliyah said, genuine delight clear in her voice. "You deserve that, honestly. You spent so many years focused completely on me and the business. I'm really happy you're finally making room for something just for yourself." "You're not upset?" Nia asked carefully. "I know it might feel strange thinking about me building a relationship with someone new." "I'm not upset at all," Aaliyah said firmly. "I've watched you sacrifice so much for so long, Mom. Watching you finally have something good just for yourself, that doesn't feel strange. It feels like exactly what should happen. I hope it works out. I really do." Nia felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, listening to her daughter's genuine warmth on the subject. One more small, unexpected gift in a life that had, against every early expectation, grown into something remarkably full and good. During her sophomore year of college, Aaliyah secured a competitive summer internship with a regional business consulting firm, an opportunity she had worked hard to earn, competing against dozens of other ambitious students for a limited number of positions. The internship, based in a city several hours from both her mother's home and her college campus, required her to live independently for the first time in a completely unfamiliar place, managing her own housing, budget, and daily logistics without the safety net of family nearby. "I'm nervous," she admitted to Nia during a phone call shortly before the internship began. "It's a big opportunity, but it's also the first time I'll be totally on my own, without you, or Dad, or anyone close by, if something goes wrong." "You're more prepared for this than you probably realize," Nia said. "You've been building toward independence your whole life, sweetheart. I have complete confidence you'll handle whatever comes up, and you can always call me, no matter what. Distance doesn't change that." The internship, as it turned out, went remarkably well. Aaliyah impressed her supervisors with the same combination of competence and warmth that had marked her work at Reyes Catering, eventually receiving an early offer for a full-time position with the firm upon her graduation the following year. A testament, Nia thought proudly, to the values and work ethic she had worked so hard to instill in her daughter across nearly 2 decades of careful, determined parenting. Aaliyah graduated from college 2 years later, with honors, having secured the job offer from her internship firm, along with several other competing offers she carefully weighed before making her final decision. The graduation ceremony brought together, once again, the entire unlikely family unit that had formed over the years since that first strange car ride. Nia, now engaged to Terrence following a quiet, heartfelt proposal the previous winter. Malcolm and Vanessa, now genuinely, warmly part of the extended family circle. Denise and Nia's mother, proud grandmother and great-aunt figures who had supported Aaliyah unconditionally since her earliest days. Standing together in the crowded stadium, watching Aaliyah cross the stage to receive her diploma, Nia found herself overwhelmed by the strange, winding journey that had brought them all to this particular moment. A journey that had begun so many years earlier with devastating abandonment in a kitchen doorway and had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, grown into this. A full, complicated, genuinely loving family, built not despite the pain of its beginning, but through the hard, deliberate work of choosing, again and again, to build something better in its place. After the ceremony, Aaliyah found her way through the crowd to her assembled family, tears of joy streaming down her face as she embraced each of them in turn. "I couldn't have done any of this without all of you," she said, looking around at the unlikely group who had gathered to celebrate her. "Every single one of you, in your own way, helped build the person I've become. I don't think many people get to say that about a family as complicated as ours. I'm grateful for every bit of it, even the hard parts." The following spring, Nia married Terrence in a small, intimate ceremony held in the garden of the same restaurant where Reyes Catering had first gotten its start. A location chosen deliberately, Nia explained during her vows, as a way of honoring the long, difficult journey that had ultimately led her to this moment of genuine happiness. Aaliyah served as her mother's maid of honor, delivering a toast during the reception that left few dry eyes among the assembled guests. "My mother built an entire life for us out of nothing," Aaliyah said, raising her glass toward Nia, who stood beside Terrence, radiant with quiet joy. She never once let the hardest chapter of her story become the whole story. She taught me, through everything she did, that the people who hurt you don't get to decide who you become afterward. Only you get to decide that. Watching her stand here today, marrying a man who genuinely deserves her, after everything she's built and overcome, I don't think I've ever been prouder of anyone in my entire life. Malcolm, sitting near the back of the reception with Vanessa beside him, raised his own glass quietly during the toast, a look of genuine, humble gratitude on his face. Gratitude, Nia understood, watching him from across the room, not just for being included in this joyful moment, but for the entire unlikely journey that had allowed him, after everything, to remain part of his daughter's life at all. Years later, when people who knew only fragments of Nia's remarkable story asked her how she had managed to build such a full, genuinely happy life after such a painful beginning, she always answered the same careful, thoughtful way. "I think the mistake people make," she would say, "is believing that healing means erasing the pain, or pretending it never happened. I don't think that's really true. I think healing means building something real and good right alongside the pain, without letting the pain have the final say over your life. My daughter's father hurt me terribly, once. I could have let that define the rest of my story completely. Instead, I chose to build something remarkable anyway, and when fate brought him back into my life in the strangest possible way, I chose, carefully and deliberately, to let my daughter decide what she wanted to do with that chance, rather than letting my own old anger make that decision for her." Was it worth it? People would sometimes ask, giving him another chance, after everything. It was worth it for her, Nia would answer honestly. That's really all that ever mattered to me in the end. Not whether he deserved forgiveness, whether she deserved the chance to build her own honest relationship with the truth of where she came from. I think, looking at the woman she's become, the answer to that question has always been clear.